3 weeks we've been talking about Miraculous God. And again, we are kind of looking at who God is through his creation. What God has created. What have we talked about so far? Does anybody remember? What have we talked about? What? Universe. And how God has created the stars and the heavens, and the heavens declare his glory, and all of those things. What else have we talked about?
Childlike faith.
Childlike faith, yeah. And how we need to take God at face value. And we realize who he is partially through his creation. What else have we talked about? Who remembers?
How amazing the human
Yeah,
body is.
human body. The miraculous way he has made things work, and they orchestrate and work together. And you know, it's when you look at the complexity of just what he has created in this body, which is so temporary, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. Science is still uncovering the different aspects of who we are physically. What else have we talked about?
All his creations, even in the deep sea.
Yeah, sea creatures and sea life. We've talked about the Mariana Trench. We've talked about all kinds of things. And I want you to remember, I want to have that mindset today as we come back to this concept of who is God and who is God revealed through what he has created. That's where I want us to be today. Where is God and who is God? And let's look at it through his creation. There have been some people on this planet that really have lived through a living hell. Many of those people experienced the worst that this planet has to offer in the form of concentration camps. Some of the horrors that we have learned about and read about over the years were played out not too long ago. Back in World War II, we read about this one place called Auschwitz. A terrible place. A horrible camp. It was kind of called the death camp. It's in all the history books. We can read about how the worst that humankind could give seemed to take place during those days. But there was a man, his name was Witold Pilecki. And Witold was a 39-year-old veteran of the Polish-Soviet War. He was also a member of the resistance. The thing that makes this guy so unique, is he volunteered to go in, to be captured, and to go into Auschwitz, and to there collect information, to collect data, to collect what was going on, and to take that information and get it to the Allies. He volunteered to go to this living hell. He volunteered to go in there knowing full well, I'm not quite sure how this is going to turn out. But Witold believed so strongly in values, in the value of human life, and serving and helping his fellow man, his fellow woman. He felt so strongly about it that he volunteered to go to Auschwitz. The plan was, I'll go to Auschwitz and I'll gather information, and then I'll escape and I'll come back to the Allies. That was the plan. Does that sound like insanity or what?
Pretty close.
Pretty close. He spent 3 years in Auschwitz before he did finally escape. And he made it back to the Allies, and he reported to them the atrocities which you and I learn about today that took place in that death camp. After that, he worked in the resistance. He was in exile, basically. He was being hunted. And back in 1948, is when he was found by Stalin's police and executed. Terrible story. Communists covered it all up, and it wasn't until 1989 that we really learned the truth about his life and what he had done and why he did the things that he did. Now I want to bring you full circle again. So God creates humankind in his own image. He creates people with a heart that says, I love you so much. I love good things. I love righteousness. I love the things that are positive and progressive for this world. He says, I care about you so much that I'm willing to put my own agenda aside. I'm willing to go into a situation that I have no idea how I'm going to get out of for the sake of other people, because I so dearly know that this is the right thing for me to do. And he says, I do it for people that I haven't even met. He says, I do it for people that I will probably never meet. And he says, I enter into this because this is the way that God has created me. So God creates. Anybody here remember the place called Chernobyl? Remember that one? Chernobyl. Reactor plant. Well, way back in 1986, when they were doing some testing at the plant, reactor number 4 blew up. It experienced a power surge. And this reactor blew up and it spilled all of this radioactive material out into the environment. They still argue today about the death toll of how many people were killed during that whole horrific event. But the problem with Chernobyl was after the original event took place, there was a very large body of water. It was a backup in case the water cooling pumps failed, that they would have this backup reservoir of water to cool the reactors so that they didn't explode. Well, the problem was this pool of water now was contaminated deeply with this radioactive material, but it was building pressure also. And if nothing was done about it, it was eventually going to explode and would probably be worse than the original disaster, putting tons and tons of radioactive material into the environment. Well, at this time, there was all kinds of volunteers, not paid, volunteers that had volunteered to help in the Chernobyl cleanup. There was 3 men, and these 3 men, realizing what was going to take place, that the first disaster would not be the worst, it would be the second disaster. These 3 men suited up in wetsuits, and they went into this body of infected water. And they dove down to the bottom of it, and they opened some valves that had failed to release the pressure, knowing full well that this radioactive environment that they were going into willingly would end up taking their own lives. These are volunteers. 3 days after this, after they successfully opened the valves and they came out, 3 days later, all 3 of the men had passed. These volunteers. They had passed because of the intense radioactivity that they voluntarily went into. They were then buried in lead coffins. You see, and God creates. And God creates people. People that are willing to sacrifice themselves for the well-being of other people. People that they don't even know. God creates people with this ability in his own image so that they can take the love that he puts inside of you, of them, so that they can sacrifice for the well-being of another person. Does that make any sense at all? To give up your own life for people that you've never, and yet it happens all the time. Because God creates people in his own image, filled with a deep and abiding love, filled with this this desire to see the best for other people. That's how God creates people. So God creates. Anybody remember the name James Persian? Does that name ring a bell to anybody? No? How about Shepherd, Michigan? Does that name ring a bell? James Persian was at home with his two younger siblings. The two siblings were playing in another room. James was watching TV. Dad left to go get his fiancée and pick her up and bring her home. Right after Dad left, horrific events started to unfold. James says he heard this young woman's voice outside screaming at the top of her lungs to let her in. He said he felt like just listening to her voice, that if he didn't, then she was going to die. So James was wrestling with this, and he finally opens the door, and what does he see? He finds this young woman, a CMU student, who had been raped by an ex-con, covered with tape, and he lets her in. And you know what he does? He turns out all the lights in the house. He grabs a knife. He takes the two younger siblings, he takes the girl, and they all go into the bathroom, and he locks the door. And they sit there in silence, in darkness, and they listen to this maniac outside screaming to let him in. But James he's resolute. He's not going to give in. He's going to protect this woman, and he's going to protect his younger siblings. Finally, the man gets so frustrated that he grabs a gas can and he throws it on one part of the house and lights it. Well, in the meantime, James had called his dad, and his dad in turn very, very smartly calls 911. I mean, boom, boom. Unfortunately, the man gives up, and the house is burning at this point, but Dad pulls in just in time to keep the fire from going any further. Later, police ended up in a battle with the man, and the man was killed. You see, but God creates humankind in his own image. In an image that says, I don't care what kind of trouble you're having in your life. I'll sacrifice everything that I have for your benefit, for you. I'll do it. And God creates. Certainly everybody knows the name of Newtown, Connecticut. Told you this was going to be a difficult day. December 2012, 20 students, 6 adults lost their lives that day as this maniac by the name of Lanza is shooting people in the school. What you might not know is the name Victoria Soto. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? You see, Victoria was a teacher there in the school that day. And when Lanza went into the school and started shooting, of course, the school went into all kinds of conniptions, trying to, classrooms, put people in closets and find safety and all of these things. And Victoria, her classroom erupted in just chaos. And she finally got her students into the closet and said, stay in the closet and be quiet. And after she successfully did that, Lanza broke into her room. And being a smart girl, she told this guy, they're all down at the gym. It's gym class time. But the students were so fearful, so crazed, that they broke out and started running in all directions. And Lanza started shooting. But what did Victoria do? She put herself in front of Lanza and took the bullets and died that day for her students. Why? Because God creates people that love other people. He creates people that care for others. And God. God creates us in his own image to love other people. I'm sure most of you will remember Air Florida flight number 90. Again, not a very funny story. Back in 1982, 78 people lost their lives. 6 people were in the water that survived the crash. But what you probably don't remember is a man by the name of Arland Williams. Does that name ring a bell to anybody? Arland was injured in the crash. He ended up in the water. But every time that the rope and the life preserver were lowered into the water to this injured man, you know what he did? He gave it to the others. He passed it on. And he did this not once, not twice, but for all of the others, until he finally succumbed to his own injuries and went under the water. You see, it happened to be a pastor that was watching all this, and he was just amazed that this man would take his own opportunity to save himself and pass it on to someone else. And God creates humankind in his own image, in a way that they will be willing to sacrifice themselves for the love that they have of someone else. Sacrificial love. Love that knows no boundaries. Love that is absolutely complete. And God creates. Everybody remembers 9/11. We just remembered that day not too long ago and the events of that. Again, it's all in the history books, and we all lived through it, I think, here in this room. But again, the one thing that you might know much about is a man by the name of Richard Sokorla. Does that name ring a bell? Richard was in charge of security for Morgan Stanley. He was in the second tower, not the first one. But Richard was such a fanatic about his job that he actually made the tower go through an evacuation procedure or test twice a year. That was part of the ritual that he had established. We're going to do this. We're going to go through this twice a year so that, God forbid, if something should ever happen, people know how to get out of here and to do it in order and where to go and what to do and where to get your instructions and all those things. He said this is so important, and they would do that twice a year. After the first tower was hit, Richard immediately went into action, put his whole plan into action. He ended up dying in the second tower. But afterward, experts after looking at all the events that took place that day, said that it was because of his immediate action and his fortitude and being so precise with all of the evacuation procedures and making sure that they did these on a regular basis. He said he probably saved a couple thousand people that day before he himself was lost. Why? Because God creates people in his own image to care for others, to love other people, to love the things that are good, things that are wholesome, the things that build people up and not tear people down. He creates people with this attitude, this mentality, this love inside of us that says, I'm willing to do whatever I need to do. I'm willing to sacrifice for you. Sacrificial love. And God creates. If God can create fallible human beings in the way that he does, if God gives us the ability to reason, care, love, sacrifice for others, wouldn't he do the same thing for you? Wouldn't he? Wouldn't God also do the exact same thing for you that we do for other people? Absolutely. Is there any doubt in anybody's mind here today? That God has looked at us in the state that we have been in, a state as humankind. It says, you guys are lost, you're hopelessly lost, and yet God says, I can help you, and I will sacrifice myself totally for you, totally for you. And he does it because of the love that he has for all of us. You see, as we look at who this Creator God is, I don't want us to just see how magnificently he can create the universe and life and all of those things. I want you to see what he places inside of us. This uncanny love, affection, concern, this uncanny ability to sacrifice, to give up so much. This pilot lost her life for others. He gives us so much. I want you to walk out of here today knowing that you were created to know him, this one that instills all of these qualities, all of these characteristics inside each and every one of us. It's easy to ask an adult, a parent, is there anything you wouldn't do for your kids? Is there anything? Would you do anything in the world for your kids? Sure you would. But God says, you know what? The love that I have for you is so deep that I want you to realize that there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you. And I place that same love inside of you. As a creature of mine, created in my image, I give it to you. I want you to walk away today knowing that he spared nothing, and his willingness, his will keeps you going, and he is not against you at all. He's absolutely for you. There's absolutely nothing that God wouldn't and hasn't done for each living soul sitting here today. It's done. You might look at some of these stories that we've talked about and the sacrifices that were made. They're absolutely nothing compared to what God has done for you. Nothing. If that's what humankind can do, think about the depth of what an almighty God can and has done for each person here. Think about it. Go to the next one. Is it possible that you were an accident? Would the one that created you with such compassion, feeling, and love ever abandon you? You ever feel abandoned? I know I have sometimes. But I need to come back to forward center and realize that, you know what? God would never abandon me. In all of my insecurities and all of my rebellion and all of my foolish decisions and everything else, God would never abandon me. He would swim through the water to open the valves to save my life. And he did. Absolutely nothing would he not do. Is he not more concerned about you than himself? You see, there's the key. All of these people that I've talked to you about this morning were deeply concerned about the lives of other people. That is exactly where God is at. He absolutely cares more about your life and the lives of your family and your friends and your kids and your grandkids and your spouses and all. He absolutely cares more about that than he does his own life. He gave it up. He absolutely gave it up for others. Many that he had never even talked to, but he knew them. He knows us all. What's next? When he seems indifferent, he's not. Mother Teresa complained about that, wrote about that all the time. She said, believe it or not, Mother Teresa said, most of my experience with God has been through his silence. I prayed, I've asked, I've looked for him, I've yearned for him, I've done all this to commune with God, and you know what I got in return? She says, silence. Nothing. Does that mean he's not concerned? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When your life feels like it's out of control, I want you to know that it's not. It's not. God is on the job. God is always there. But it doesn't mean that he always relieves us from the agonies or the turmoil or the pain of this life. He doesn't. You see, it's kind of like those divers that went into Chernobyl. They were more focused on the outcome than they were the current situation. It's the same with God. We complain a lot about, God, how could you let something happen? And you know what he says in response? He said, I let it happen, but then I provide for you. If you would just open your eyes, I give you the strength to go through it. I let you be changed for the good as you go through it. Through your anger and your bitterness, I'll walk with you. I'll stay with you. I will love you. I will help you in all ways. He never, ever gives up. With told Pilecki, do you think that many of the times, many of the hours and days he spent in Auschwitz during that 3-year time, you think he wanted to give up from time to time? I don't know. I would think probably. I would have. I'm sure the thoughts in my mind would have been like, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure this is worth it. But he never gave up. When you walk out of here today, I hope that you walk out of here with the complete understanding that the depth of God's love for you is far beyond anything that you'll ever imagine. And that there's absolutely nothing he wouldn't do for you. Now, we hear those words all the time, but I want you to know it. I want you to know it in your heart. There's absolutely nothing he wouldn't do for me. Lord, I just pray that as we do ponder that this week, I pray that we would see new ways, new levels of love, new things that you're doing in our life and in the lives of others, as we see how you provide for us, as we see how you spare no expense, you spare nothing to care for us and to nurture us and to love us. So, Lord, I pray that you would just keep that in our minds, the forefront of our minds throughout this week as we consider how you've created us. And Lord, we love you. Amen.